Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Nita Asher.
And I'm Scott McCandless. It is the week of January 3rd, and this is your Monday briefing.
On today's episode, we'll look at the potential for tax legislation in the new Congress. Rohit Kumar will join us for that in a bit. But first, Scott, what does the week ahead look like?
Sure, Nita, the 118th Congress convenes today. And that means that the House will be in the process of electing a new Speaker of the House. And also from a tax perspective, the House Ways and Means Committee will select a new chairman. So it's a very busy start to the new year. And here to help us walk through what it all means is Rohit Kumar. Rohit, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
The new Congress convenes today. Republicans control the House and Democrats control the Senate. Rohit, what does the divided government mean for tax policy?
Yeah, so look, we're not expecting, at least I'm not expecting, a ton of tax legislation to get signed into law over the course of the next 2 years. I think, there are a couple places where we might find some exceptions to that general rule. There's a 1099-K reporting requirement, which Treasury and IRS unilaterally sort of delayed the effective date of that by a year. So those notices aren't going out immediately, but I think there'll be continued pressure to do something legislatively on that topic. We had a pretty thin tax title at the end of the year in the omnibus spending bill. So you still have 174, 163J and full expensing that remain as sort of notional to-do items, 174 and 163J in particular, and full expensing is starting to phase down as of a couple of days ago, as of January 1. And then you've got House and Senate Democrats still interested in doing something in the child tax credit space, some sort of renewed expansion, maybe not the full 2021 version, but some version of that to be included as whatever we might see over the course of the next year or two. But then the rest of it is probably a lot of just laying the groundwork for the 2025 fiscal cliff when all the individual and pass-through provisions from the TCJA expire, and setting up a big showdown at the OK Corral.
Rohit, you had mentioned a couple of these issues already, but the federal spending bill that passed at the end of 2022 didn't address several tax issues, including the deductibility of research expenditures, the tightening of the interest deduction limitation, or the delay to bonus depreciation, as you just mentioned. When, if at all, could we expect Congress to address any of these issues?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question, and one that I'm getting asked a lot, even in just the first couple of days of the new year. And look, there's not any immediate sort of action forcing event. We have government funding through September 30th. We've got no other kind of like near term must pass legislation. We have to deal with a debt limit at some point, maybe Q2, Q3. But that's obviously a little bit dicey, and House and Senate Democrats have said they won't negotiate over that point, although House and Senate Republicans may have a different view. And so, it's hard for me to paint a sort of optimistic picture of tax legislation, even kind of these smaller 174, 162J style things, let alone like the bigger stuff that's happening at the end of 2025. Q3, maybe government funding, September 30th, we have a deadline. Maybe debt limit. Again, the deadline on that is uncertain, no earlier than Q2, it would seem, based on most recent projections. And then there's always just the year end, because we always do some sort of year end bill, typically a government funding bill, but at some point in November, December, sort of that Thanksgiving to end of year window, we typically see some major piece of legislation. And if you were betting, you'd probably be looking at year end, as sort of difficult as that will be for taxpayers to manage.
If we could turn to the international for a moment, Rohit, the European Council recently adopted an EU directive to implement the Pillar 2 global minimum tax. From a U.S. perspective, what steps do you expect the new Congress or the administration to take to facilitate potential U.S. compliance with the Pillar 2 requirements?
Yeah, this is a really sticky wicket, if you will, because you've got the EU directive adopted and individual nations will now start making changes to their own national law. I think the sort of from the congressional perspective, it really depends on whether or not the undertaxed profits rule, the UTPR, whether any country adopts a UTPR that is effective before January 1, 2025. Some countries are at least talking about it. But if it's not till 2025, then it's entirely possible that this Congress, which last 2023 and 2024, views a 2025 event as that's the next guy's problem. That's not my problem. I don't have to deal with that right away. But to the extent that some countries are talking about doing this in 2024, I do think you will start to see House and Senate Republicans and even House and Senate Democrats react to that, but perhaps not in the way that the administration has promised many of our allies. There was a letter written at the end of last year by every tax writer, Republican tax writer in the House and Senate, plus the ranking member on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Risch, basically saying, look, this UTPR is no good. It prejudices the U.S. incentive regime. If countries try to, attack U.S. multinationals for underpaying tax in the U.S. on their domestic income, you should expect Congress to react negatively, to defend the U.S. tax base and perhaps to retaliate. So they threw down the gauntlet saying, look, you come after our tax base, don't expect us to take that lightly. And so I think those sorts of ideas will continue to develop, but really whether there's anything actionable here, any law that gets passed, that gets signed into law, or any bill that gets signed into law, I think that really depends on whether or not Congress feels like it has to act in the next 2 years, or if they can just sort of saber rattle for the next 2 years.
Rohit, as the new Congress takes shape and we wait to see what developments there will be around tax policy, what questions are you receiving from companies and what actions are you encouraging them to consider?
Yeah, so I think they're sort of in two spaces, the questions that I'm largely getting. On the domestic side, it is the TCJA expiring or expired provisions, with 174 kind of leading the charge, but 162J kind of a close second in terms of when are we going to see action on that? When are we going to get guidance from the administration on 174? We don't even have that yet. And, as I've said, I think maybe Q3, but more likely Q4 as sort of the action forcing event, with 1099K being maybe the horse to ride on the domestic TCJA front. And then a lot of questions on the international side. What is Congress thinking? How are they going to react? You've got divided government. You've got a bunch of House and Senate Republicans who have newfound authority on Capitol Hill, who are deeply skeptical of what the Treasury has negotiated at the OECD and have sent no signal that they're willing to kind of go along with what the administration has proposed. And, as a company, how do you manage that? How do you manage the of a set of rules coming out of the EU that are inconsistent with the rules we have here? And how do we harmonize this or kind of minimize the compliance burden, or really not just the compliance burden? How do we deal with the fact that absent some change, U.S. companies could be facing significant double tax on the same streams of income with no relief in the immediate horizon?
Well, it looks like we have an interesting year ahead of us. Thank you, Rohit.
Thanks for having me.
And to our viewers, thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for several upcoming episodes, including deep dives on specific tax issues, such as a deep dive conversation that Nita had with regard to the stock buyback excise tax, as well as the Week in Review, which will be out this Friday. Until then, stay tuned. Take care.